This is Alec.
And this is Jack.
Welcome to another episode of Smith and Scholar. Smith and Scholar is a multimedia project dedicated to promoting and encouraging young men to pursue and live the good life. Work.
Work.
Well, good thing our pitches were not so defined that we could face a copyright strike for humming / saying the words of a certain tune. Sorry, Jack. That was a dig against your musical abilities.
I know. I'm okay with that.
Anyways, work. Everybody works to some extent. We talked about friendship last time. We're switching gears a little bit. You want to introduce kind of the next three topics we'll be talking about?
Yeah, so we're kind of moving into like more practical things, right? And so something, Alec and I were brainstorming and thinking about things, and we kind of recognize that, things that are going to be constants in our, for the rest of your life, really, once you hit a certain age, but even like starting as a teenager, are work. And then, and by work, we'll get into work, but work is very broad, but also can be defined narrowly. And then study, by which we mean not necessarily school studying, because we're kind of incorporating that into work, but study for its own sake to gain knowledge, right? And then after that, we want to do leisure, and why we think leisure is important, and respite, from our work and our study in order to take stock and collect our thoughts and think and enjoy what's around us, essentially. And so that's the path going forward for these next three episodes. And so we hope you enjoy them, and we think there's, something for everyone to learn in these coming episodes. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Well, you can relax after listening to the third episode.
Yeah, true. This is true.
So thanks for the little roadmap that you gave us, Jack. So just take that into account when you're listening to this and the next two. So again, everybody works to some extent. So if you're thinking about different stages of life, and this is where we will kind of disambiguate what we mean by work. So when you're young, you're working. What does that look like? Well, it looks like you in school studying and attending classes and doing your homework, things of that nature. And it starts from when you're 6, in first grade, up until college, and then graduate school, if that's something you're attending. That's what we're including in the framework of work. As Jack mentioned, study, going to school. Study is on top of going to school. It's what you do in your private time, reading, researching, doing things of that nature, which we'll talk about later. So this is confined to work, and we're classifying school as work. So after going to school, you typically graduate and get a job. And I think that's clear to see that that is some sort of work. And then even if you don't get a job, maybe you're a stay-at-home mother, stay-at-home father. Well, then taking care of the house and taking care of the children is your form of work. Another thing you can do during this time is also volunteer work. And again, that's a clear way to see it. And then finally, in retirement, there are still ways in which you can work. And that is namely taking care of your house, of your estate, of your belongings, and then also taking care of any children or family members that need the care and attention. So we don't want to exclude anyone from what does work mean. Well, we might get to some exclusions later, but we want to broaden what we mean by work so that no matter what state of life you're in, these points should be applicable to you. And we also don't want to cheapen what people are doing that a lot of people don't consider work, like stay-at-home parents, because that's really important activities and things that you do to upkeep the family, the home, and all the people residing in it. So we just want to make sure that that's clear at the offset so that there's no confusion moving forward. So you can basically, you're working from the day you turn 6 and start first grade or 7 years old or whatever, up until the day you die, you can work. And there are some cases which you might not work, but we'll get to those later. So what do we mean by work?
Yeah, I mean, we just provided all these examples, and so maybe it might seem unclear by what we're meaning by work. And essentially, what we're getting at is work is labor, right? It's an exertion of the physical, the mental, even the spiritual and emotional, um, and you know, it's exerting yourself, right? And so, uh, like we were talking about, there are different types of work. As Alec was trying to guiding us through, you can see this in the different phases of life, from youth to adulthood to retirement. Um, and I think it's important to recognize that no matter what phase or what work you're doing, even though we can joke about the types of jobs that friends and family members have, we can joke about the types of jobs that we have or do.
Like, oh, Jack, you studied political science?
I mean, you can rightfully laugh at that. Like, I ain't got nothing, man. Like, go ahead. Like, it's true, right? But even then, like, it might seem that something has a lack of importance, but it's not good for us to joke, because work has meaning. Work is good for its own sake, and we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, so we're not saying that, oh, never make a joke about somebody's work that they do. It's fair to have fun and poke fun and say, oh, Jack, you studied political science? Well, what did that teach you?
That I had to get a law degree.
So there you go. As long as you can take it in good jest. But really the point is, you shouldn't be insulting another's work, because, again, it has meaning, it has value, and it's contributing to society, and it's something that you do in the pursuit of the good life. So we just want to make that point clear. Even people who are creatives, authors, YouTube people, YouTube stars, even that's work, even if you think it's like cheap work or something that's not as helpful. Now, we ought to respect the work of everyone, because it is right and it's just to do so, but that is presuming that the work is honorable and respectful, or respectable, meaning it's deserving of respect. Mm-hmm. So I did just say, some YouTubers, their work you should respect. Now, maybe some other people who are making videos don't have respectable work. What does that mean? And not just YouTubers, but it just comes to mind because I think a lot of criticism is sent their way because you're just sitting in front of a camera talking, which, oh, wait.
Hopefully people will find that our work is respectable.
That's the hope. So what does it mean that work is respectable or honorable? And I think if we're coming from the stance of what you've been hearing throughout this podcast, and again, looking at natural law and looking at the order of goods and order of actions, well, then work should be ordered towards the good. It should be something that is uplifting and is helpful to society. So I don't want to bring up any bad examples necessarily, because I'm sure you can think of some, but something that is lying or cheating or bringing vice into somebody else's life would not necessarily be an honorable work, and does not deserve respect. And again, I want to clarify, that doesn't mean we disrespect somebody's work, but it is not, I would even say we might not even classify it as work, because if we're looking at it as a labor that is ordered towards the good, if that's what we define work as, and again, that's a working definition here, then if you are a pool shark who is dishonestly cheating people out of their money, that's not really work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's not. You're missing the part about it being ordered towards the good.
Yeah, so then if it is ordered towards the good, it should be something that's helping you grow in virtue. And I'll just say one example that comes to mind. I think teaching is honorable work, and that's because you are helping form the minds of the youth. And if you're doing it in a manner that is helping them work towards the good, understand virtue, then it can be a virtuous job.
Mm-hmm. And then, like I was just thinking about, oftentimes in our modern society, we deride like jobs that require manual labor, and it actually might be that I think people who are manual laborers actually probably experience and learn and witness virtue more readily, because I mean, think about how hard it is to do manual labor. It's hard, right? You sweat and toil and blood, and like, for example, there's one that comes to mind. It's like fortitude, right? You're learning to endure and to work towards something. And I think we all have like the vision of the manual labor who's working because this is, for some people, it might be the only job they can get, right, and they have to provide for their family, and they just have to endure it in order to be able to provide for their family. There's another great example. I think there was an Astros baseball player from a couple seasons back who, I don't know if he's retired yet or not, but his name was Evan Gaddis. He was a catcher, and before he made it in the pros, he was a janitor at a high school. And like, imagine being this guy who has talent in baseball, and you're just waiting for your shot, and so you're working as a janitor because that's what you can do. That's like what you don't have any other applicable skills. I'm not necessarily sure that was the case, but that's what he had, and so he had to endure, and he had to be prudent in what he did in order so when he got his shot, he could take it and that sort of thing. So I think those are good ways in which we can see virtue in work.
Yeah, and I want to bring up one example in which we can see pursuit of virtue or pursuit of vice, and it is the work of a politician. So without getting too political, if a politician is not seeking the good for their constituents, if they are actively pursuing or writing legislation that is damaging to the people that they are entrusted to take care of, well, then that would not be good work or respectable work. On the other hand, if they are working on legislation or vying for an advantageous position for their people, then it's good work. So you can have the same title, the same job title, but you're not always working towards the good in that position. So there's a little dichotomy to take there as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing we can see from all this is sort of like the ubiquity of work, right? Like work isn't just like one profession or one area. Like, well, oftentimes when we think of work, you think of like just your job, and that's super broad. So I mean, in that way, you can see that it's ubiquitous. But sometimes you think of like hard work, you think again like just manual labor, but like work is all sorts of things. And so you can see why Alec and I think work is important, because it's just so we do it, right? Like it's sort of unavoidable. We have to work.
Yeah, it is a part of life. And so it's really important that you understand, and well, that everybody understands, including ourselves, the ubiquity of work and why it's important, and especially why it's important with regards to the pursuit of the good life. So work is a great place to learn and practice the virtues. Jack mentioned a few different, very concrete examples, especially manual labor, and we kind of touched upon some of the other ways in which you can learn virtue or practice it in a good space. So when you're, and we'll get a little bit more into this later in greater detail, so I'll just go ahead and move forward. But in addition to learning virtues, it's also a good way to demonstrate virtues for others. And again, we can see this pretty clearly with teachers, people in positions of authority, because they're directly in the spotlight of people below them. But I think it's also a good place for coworkers to be able to witness work and virtues among each other.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I just, from practical experience, working at different places, you people talk to you about like what your certain supervisors are like, and it seems to be that the good supervisors are always ones, for instance, that are just, right, like and how they allocate work, or how they evaluate work, or how they treat their subordinates and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, certainly, work is a great place for you to demonstrate and witness virtue. So I think that's super important. And then, like I was saying earlier, it shows that, again, the ubiquity of work sort of indicates that there's something inherent in our nature as human beings of working to labor. This is, I think, in all cultures, right? For it's very clear. And it's actually I think that bad cultures, and we can talk about this when we talk about leisure. Bad cultures are ones in which we completely elevate leisure to the detriment of there being no work. And because the whole point of leisure is that there is work, so we need leisure. And so if you just have leisure and no work, you have a bad society. If you have just work and no leisure, you have a bad culture and a bad society. And so I guess the whole point of that is to say, again, there's something inherent to our nature, and we need work. And so we should be thinking about that. That's why it's important for us to talk about it, is because it's inherent to us, and we need to recognize that work is a great place for us to grow in virtue and to learn virtue, and just another great place in which we can pursue the good life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can see just from human physiology, mental state, that working, if you work, then you're also prone to have better rest so that you can resume work the next day. In terms of mental health, having something to do to pass the time in a productive manner is also good for mental health. So we can see it not just in the kind of idealized form, the philosophical sense of work, but we can also see it just on the, here are the facts. Here are the facts, Jack. Although I didn't provide any sources for that. So just anecdotally, I'll say for now then that it's helpful. So in addition to this, other ways why work is important is because we help ourselves and we help others. So in the practical sense, well, we need to be productive members of society and earn income. And so what that means is that we are performing a good or performing a service and we're receiving something in return for it, which, as we talked about in justice, if you're doing something, you should have a just receipt of your action. And then with that a thing that you return, usually money or income of some sort, then you are able to use it and help promote the betterment of society through consuming goods, saving it for later use, and stuff like that. So that's kind of the practical aspect. But we can also look at it in a deeper level than just the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that would be the growing in virtue and helping others grow as well, not just ourselves, but using work as an opportunity to help others pursue the good life.
Yeah. So if we are working, and we talk about this a lot. If man is to work, then what is the ultimate goal of man working? Well, and specifically within the context of work, well, it should be to work as perfect as possible, to work well. And it may look different for each job that you do. And it should work, or it should look different because not everybody has the same tasks that you're required to do. But it's important to work well because there should be concern for living the good life, living virtuously, and then also because we are helping those that we are working with. Again, going back to the sense of justice, if somebody tasks you with something, you should be able to perform it, and you should be able to give it back, or give back what is owed. And then it's also by working well and by working the best we can, it's on a more practical level, we're going to advance our lives professionally. So, and it's not like a guarantee. If you work well, you're going to go and make a raise and get another job. People will notice virtue and they'll notice the growth.
And also I think, people have different paths, right? But when you advance your life professionally, I'm young in my career. I have never had a real job where I'm always working, that sort of thing. I haven't had a career yet. But for me, I think I recognize the importance of advancing professionally because it puts you in a better position to help others. And so I think that's another good aspect of work that's important to recognize.
Yeah, so it's definitely important to work well because it helps you in the virtuous life, but it also helps you in your professional life as well. And along with helping others at your workplace, it also helps your immediate family or those that you're taking care of and providing for, because they're the ones who are receiving the benefit of your income level or social status and whatnot. So, Jack, why don't you talk about some of the tie-ins to virtue since you mentioned it earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see that, like we were talking about, work is a great place for virtue to come in. It's definitely tied to it. So, let's start like what we always do when we're talking about virtue with the cardinal virtues and prudence. And so prudence, I think, is very prevalent in the ways in which we, go about doing work. Prudence can help us figure out how is the best way to do the work that we have before us. It can help us determine when to work. It can help us figure out how to distribute time and resources to the different tasks we have in order to work. So in a way, prudence is great for a great way to order work. And it, that's a way in which prudence can affect work. And it's also a good way to show, one way that this maybe manifests itself is it makes it look like you're becoming a diligent worker, so diligence in a way in work is related to prudence. And I think that's a great thing to recognize. This is important because, people work 40 hours a week or more. I'm going to be going into a profession where you work way more than 40 hours a week. And so you have to plan accordingly, right? Like, especially if you're someone who has a family, or has other, obligations going on, you want to be able to balance those so that you can do your work excellently while also pursue these other things excellently and do so in a way in which you're pursuing the good life, right? So that requires you to actually think about and decide how to do your work, when to do it, that sort of thing, being efficient, being diligent, and doing it excellently. Um, but then there's also people who, work on a project-based schedule.
Which is definitely more my...
Yeah. So, I mean, Alec, do you want to talk about that a little bit, and like what that means for you as far as like prudence being a practical virtue in work?
Yeah, so being in the world of academia where there are hours, but also since the work is very heavily project based, you have kind of these milestones that need to be met for funding agencies and whatnot. So uh, there are definitely caricatures of what this looks like in my space. So there are some professors who work pretty constantly throughout, and they're having regular meetings with the students to make sure things are going well. And then there are some professors or some students who wait until the very end when the deadline is about to hit and rush that job and get it finished so that you meet the deadline. And I think we can see, if thinking back on the virtues, which one is the more virtuous approach. And it's going to be the one where you're constantly working in a manner that is befitting the type of work, the project work. So you're hitting all your milestones, you're getting the work done, you're sharing it with your teammates, rather than waiting till the very end. So then I also want to talk about, just because you may not necessarily be working a 40-hour week, even if there's some hours attached to the work that you're doing, and you kind of talked about this because of the nature of lawyer work too, is not necessarily 40 hours a week. Maybe it's set at 60 hours a week or something. But because it's so flexible, there is definitely a chance to not be prudent about the work that you're doing and either waste it or overwork so that you can just get all the work out of the way and then say, hey, I got some more time to relax. So it's the balance between those two and what you're doing for work and when you have more time to relax or rest.
Yeah, I think those are good ways to look at how prudence affects work. And then kind of what you're getting into almost, I felt like when you're talking about, like depending on your schedule, there might be certain temptations that are involved in that. And so I think that's where temperance becomes important in work. Temperance as a virtue helps us to moderate our work. And I think, this is particularly clear, talking about virtue being the mean between two extremes. I think temperance is a great virtue in work because the two extreme temptations of work are to diverge towards laziness or to diverge towards workaholism. And Alec, I know you have some thoughts on workaholism, so do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that nowadays there's a huge emphasis on work, which workaholism. One thinker, Jose Maria Escrivá, said or called it professionalitis, and it's this idea that you're idolizing work rather than viewing work in an ordered way. And I think, especially within temperance, we can really see that, because if you're overworking, well, just by using the term over, you're not in the happy medium in between that. So again, I think it's really important nowadays because, just when I'm communicating with friends, if I'm texting or calling, we say, how's it going? You just say, work, man, I'm working. and to some extent it's true, because that
working hard or hardly working.
That's right. Taking a lot of time out of the day to do work, because it's 8 hours or more. So that's 1/3 of your day. You sleep for, 8 hours or so. And then you have the rest of the time for leisure or other duties and activities. But again, this overemphasis on work and what it means can be really detrimental to what you're doing outside of work. And so I think that's one thing to be cautious of as we're approaching this idea of work.
And then there's the opposite of workaholism, like I mentioned at first, and that's laziness. And laziness, I think, is an issue because it doesn't just not end up being virtuous work, but it disorders your understanding of work, right? So the lens of laziness views work as a punishment. And so the result is you try and do the least amount of work as possible. And, that's not work, actually. You're not fulfilling, with our working definition of work. It's not meeting that understanding of work. And so in that regard, that's where laziness becomes a problem.
Yeah, definitely. So then I think we can move on to justice. And Jack, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. And again, recall how we're understanding justice, thinking about what we owe to others. Remember, there's something, the whole point of justice is that there's something due to the other. And so when we're thinking about justice and work, again, recall thinking about what we owe to others. And so, for instance, Alec, you have a wife and a family, and you have to support them. And so, justice requires that you find a way to do so, and work is a legitimate way of fulfilling this obligation. To our employer who has decided to take them into their company, or, whatever the setup is, whether it's, academics, you've been chosen to be a researcher or granted the opportunity to receive a PhD and do research, you owe them work, right? Like, they've hired you to do work. And so they pay us, and so we have to earn that pay. You have to put in the work, and so because that is what is owed to your employer. And so on the other side of things, I think it's interesting to see how particularly this concept of justice in work plays out in different ways globally.
Yeah, definitely. So it's, and we're not going to get too far into this, but we see in the US that we have some pretty strict labor laws, and for the good, because back in the 20s, 10s.
I mean, basically throughout the late 19th century and early 20th century.
Right. There was child labor. There were super long working hours, and you were getting paid peanuts. I think in some cases, literally, or people at least were selling peanuts for 10 cents or whatever.
Some of my law school friends who are listening are going to chagrin at this, because the case law around this they hate. For good reasons, but we'll put that aside. For all of you out there listening, ignore it. Just pretend that doesn't exist, and the practical reality that was child labor. Like, we're dealing with that right now.
Well, we're talking about the morality. So we have these strict labor laws, but other countries don't necessarily have that, and this might lead to lower prices in other parts of the world for manufacturing certain goods. But what is the cost of that? It might be indentured servitude, or practically slavery in some cases.
Not even practically, almost reality. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, these are things to take into account in terms of justice and work, because you should be receiving commensurate compensation for the work that you're putting in. If you're not receiving that compensation for adequate work, then that's unjust on the side of the employer. So we're lucky that in the US we have these labor laws that exist to protect the rights of the worker. Mm-hmm. And leaving case study or case law aside, I think we can look at the morality and maybe disagree on the implementation. And, we'll leave further discussion for a later time.
Absolutely. And then, last but not least, we have, out of the cardinal virtues, we have fortitude. And, I kind of mentioned this earlier with some of the examples I brought up, but sometimes work is burdensome. It doesn't even have to be manual labor. Work can be boring. There are days when you sit at your desk and you're doing work and it just seems tedious, and you're just there to do it. Nothing is exciting. You don't feel like you're learning anything or you're really engaging. Sometimes it's extremely difficult. You have to wrap your head around a problem. You just don't get it, and you're just not getting there. Sometimes it can drive you crazy, whether that's, people you work with, a subordinate, or someone who's higher than you on the chain of command. And then sometimes it can cause burnout. You work so hard. You get to the point where you have nothing left to give, even if you don't feel that way. But it's kind of like it can be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual burnout from work, and those things are not great, right? And as we discussed in the fortitude episode, fortitude is all about endurance and perseverance and sacrifice. And so, Alec, I know you might have a little bit of an interesting perspective on this based upon your research field.
Yeah. So while we are working, enduring hardships, maybe to the point of fatigue or burnout, it's also fortitude. It requires fortitude to maybe step back from those instances and circumstances which lead you into those situations. Because as a human factors researcher who's studying drowsiness, fatigue, especially in the driving setting, well, it would be unjust for you to work to such a condition that you are fatigued and unfit to operate a vehicle, and which puts your life and the lives of others at risk because you've overworked. So it does take fortitude sometimes to stop working in order to be safe around that. And so again, going back a little bit to U.S. labor laws, OSHA and other organizations out there help regulate this kind of work and making sure that you're not being pushed to the extremes, and that night shifts. Well, actually, I guess night shifts aren't always heavily regulated, but to the extent that the employee's health is taken into account. So I just want to put that out there because it's like, hey,
it's what you do. So, you have an interest in it. But even further, I think, again, going back to this understanding about fortitude being self-perseverance, self-sacrifice, and endurance, I think it's important for us to develop a why around why we work. Again, I think I think there should be the aspect of work is good for its own sake. So that's why we want to endure work, and get to the point where we enjoy it, or even if we don't enjoy it, understand that work is good for us. But even beyond that, I think there are certain whys that we can develop, that help us see like the long game, right? So like for me, I'm going into a career that is very demanding. There are long hours, stressful deadlines. And I mean, this isn't like, being a lawyer, this is the only career that's the case. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there, people who are listening, who can resonate with this. And, I do it. I want to do this because I love the law. I love studying the law. I love how the law works. I love taking crazy fact patterns and applying the law and figuring out what's going to happen. But, number two, and I think maybe more importantly, I want to put myself in a position where, one day, God willing, I can, have a large family. Like that's something that I desire and I want. And, you can't do that unless you have a way to support the family, right? Like it'd be irresponsible to like, you figure it out, but like, I want to be able to like provide for my family. I want my kids to go to good schools. I want my spouse I want her to be able to have, basically whatever she wants because that's what she'll deserve kind of thing. And, that sort of thing. And you can't, I think, so for me, that's like my why. Right. And, I think it's, if you're thinking about, okay, applying fortitude, I think it might be good for everyone to kind of develop a why. And outside, and I think there are two aspects to it. I think it's one, just work is good for its own sake. So that should be certainly part of your why, but also you should have another aspect that might be more practical or help you to certainly envision why work is important and why you should endure it.
Yeah. So ladies, please write your fan mail to Jack.
No comment.
Because as you can tell, he is a very good provider, or will be one day.
I will be a very good provider. Can confirm.
All right. So aside from the comical aspect, I think we've covered a lot today. Usually we kind of leave the end for kind of a few different ponderings, but this time we sprinkled it a little bit throughout here, getting into the virtues and talking about some kind of tangential points to that. So I think we're going to go ahead and call it a day, especially since our last episode was a little bit longer. So this is actually probably the second longest one we've done. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, we were saying at the end of the episode last time that we could have kept going for another hour or so, but for your sake and for our sake and for my throat's sake, we'll go ahead and stop here. But again, the important takeaways, I'll list some of them, is that work is work that is ordered towards the good ought to be respected, and part of that includes the ability to learn virtues and demonstrate virtues for others in our work.
Yeah, and I would just add that work is good for its own sake. I think I've tried to emphasize that towards the end here, but work, like in our definition of work, with work being respectable, with it being geared towards the good, that is that. I mean, when things are geared towards the good, they're good for their own sake, right? And that's kind of a circular reasoning, but I think it's true. And so you think about a good thing to think about is when you're doing work. is just recognizing that the work is good. When it is respectable, it is good, and it's part of your nature to do work and to find meaning in work and to pursue the good.
Definitely. So, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is the first in a mini series, I guess, of episodes. So, we talked about work today. Next time, we will be talking about study, and that's with regards to study outside of school, so kind of self-learning. And then the third one is leisure, which is rest, time away from work in order to recuperate and recover. So, we're trying to keep everything in that scope moving forward. So, any final thoughts or mentions?
No, I think we pretty well covered it, and I hope that our listeners have a newfound perspective on work.
And on Jack and his ability to provide.
Sure.
All right, don't forget to send in that fan mail.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Smith and Scholar. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on all the major platforms, including YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Twitter to stay up to date with everything we are doing and thinking.
Finally, feel free to give us feedback and ask questions across the different platforms. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, this is Smith and Scholar.